They say Rome fell because of barbarians, but that's a lie. The truth is darker and far more familiar. Rome didn't collapse because it was conquered. It collapsed because it rotted from the inside out. Because its money, the bloodstream of its empire, turned to poison. Sound familiar? It should, because every empire, including the one you live in right now, dies the same way. Not with swords and sieges, but with the slow, silent death of its currency. This is not just a story about ancient coins. It's a story about inflation, corruption, and the illusion of prosperity, an illusion you're living through, whether you know it or not. So tonight, we're going to uncover how Rome's currency collapse doomed the greatest empire in history, and why the exact same forces are already at work in your world today. Because if Rome's downfall teaches us anything, it's this: when money dies, civilizations follow. Let's begin with a truth most historians conveniently skip over. Rome wasn't destroyed by barbarian hordes. Those invasions were symptoms, not causes. The real cause was internal, financial, systemic, and entirely self-inflicted. You see, Rome's empire wasn't built on raw power. It was built on trust. Trust in the denarius, the silver coin that became the backbone of the ancient world. For centuries, that little coin symbolized stability. It was Rome's greatest weapon. You could take a Roman coin anywhere from the deserts of Egypt to the forests of Germania, and people would trade with you. They believed in its value because they believed in Rome. But like every empire, Rome's elites started believing their own mythology. They thought the empire could spend without consequence. They thought they could manipulate their currency to fund endless wars, welfare, and vanity projects without paying the price. They thought they could rewrite the laws of economics. They couldn't. The story begins in 27 BCE, when Augustus becomes the first emperor. The republic is gone, but the illusion of stability remains. Augustus understands something fundamental. The empire needs legitimacy, and that legitimacy starts with sound money. He reforms the mint, standardizes the currency, and sets a strict silver content for the denarius, about 95%. Each coin was nearly pure silver. It meant something. It was wealth in itself. For over a century, that stability held. Rome's economy boomed. Trade flourished. The empire expanded. The money worked. But then, as always, ambition outpaced reality. Enter the third emperor of the Flavian dynasty, Domitian. By his reign in the late 1st century CE, the costs of empire had exploded. Military salaries, infrastructure, and the ever-growing bureaucracy drained the treasury. And so, quietly, subtly, the government did what all governments eventually do when they run out of real money. They began to cheat. They started debasing the coinage. At first, it was small, a few percentage points of silver removed here and there. The coins looked the same, but they weren't. Rome was now minting promises instead of value. Over time, emperors turned this into policy. By the time of Nero, yes, the Nero who fiddled while Rome burned, the silver content of the denarius had dropped to 85%. It was the beginning of a slow-motion currency collapse that would last nearly 3 centuries. To the average Roman, life went on. Prices crept up, but slowly. People didn't understand why their coins bought less and less each year. They just assumed that the gods or greedy merchants were to blame. But it wasn't the gods. It was the government. Rome had discovered the ancient equivalent of the printing press, the imperial mint. By reducing the silver in each coin, they could create more money to pay for the army, to fund grand public works, to bribe the people with free grain and gladiator games. It was political magic, turning metal into power. But as every empire learns, monetary magic always ends in ruin. The illusion held as long as Rome kept conquering. New territories meant new loot, new slaves, and new taxpayers to fund the system. The inflow of gold and silver from foreign conquests masked the rot. But what happens when an empire stops expanding? When there's no one left to plunder, no new resources to seize? That's when the truth comes due. By the 2nd century, under Emperor Trajan and then Hadrian, Rome had reached its natural limits. Expansion stalled, expenses didn't, and the emperors did what every desperate government does: they debased further. By 200 CE, the silver content of the denarius had fallen below 50%. By 250, it was under 5%. The once stable currency of the world had become worthless tin. Rome had turned its money into a lie. The social consequences were devastating. First came inflation. Prices spiraled out of control. A loaf of bread that once cost 1 denarius now cost 10, then 50, then 100. Wages couldn't keep up. Savings vanished. Contracts became meaningless. Merchants refused to accept imperial coinage, demanding payment in kind. Grain, wine, or gold jewelry. Sound familiar? It should, because this is what happens every time money becomes fiction. Ordinary Romans suffered the most. Their savings were wiped out. Their purchasing power collapsed. The rich, of course, adapted. They moved their wealth into land, property, and foreign accounts, just as elites always do. And as the middle class disintegrated, so did Rome's social fabric. The army, the backbone of Roman power, was hit hardest. Soldiers were paid in increasingly worthless coins. Morale plummeted, so emperors began promising higher pay, then bonuses, then land grants, all financed with even more debased money. The result was predictable: mutinies, corruption, and a military that served whoever paid it best. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire entered what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. But it wasn't just political chaos, it was financial collapse. In just 50 years, Rome saw over 24 emperors rise and fall, most assassinated or overthrown. Each one tried to fix the problem by doing the same thing, minting more coins. More money, less value, endless decay. Imagine living in that world. Every day, prices rise. Your savings are worthless. The government blames enemies, foreigners, and traders. But deep down, you know the truth. The empire is hollow. People lost faith in the currency, and when that happened, they lost faith in Rome itself, because the two were the same thing. And this is the pattern every empire repeats. When the money dies, trust dies. And when trust dies, the state follows. By 301 CE, Emperor Diocletian tried to stop the bleeding. He imposed wage and price controls, the infamous edict on maximum prices. He ordered that no merchant could charge more than the state approved, and that hoarding would be punished by death. Did it work? Of course not. It never does. Prices rose anyway. Trade collapsed. Farmers abandoned their land rather than sell grain at a loss. Markets went underground. Diocletian had tried to legislate value, but you can't command faith. When people no longer trust the money, no law can save it. Finally, Constantine, the first Christian emperor, attempted one last fix. Around 312 CE, he introduced a new coin, the solidus, a gold currency of high purity. It was brilliant for a time. The solidus restored confidence among the elite and stabilized imperial finances for those close to power. But for the ordinary citizen, nothing changed, because the empire itself had changed. Rome was no longer a republic of citizens. It was a pyramid of dependency, where the few at the top controlled the flow of wealth and everyone else scrambled for scraps. The currency collapse hadn't just destroyed the economy, it had rewritten society. Taxation became unbearable. The government demanded taxes in gold, even though it paid its soldiers and workers in worthless bronze coins. This created a two-tier economy, one for the elite, who lived in gold, and another for everyone else, trapped in fiat money. Does that sound familiar? It should, because you live in the same system today. A world where those at the top hold real assets, land, stocks, commodities, while the rest are paid in paper promises that lose value by the day. Rome's economy became a machine that harvested the labor of the poor to sustain the illusion of imperial grandeur. Sound familiar again? By the late 4th century, Rome was economically exhausted. The empire still looked mighty on the map, but it was hollow. The army was underfunded. The bureaucracy was corrupt. The cities were shrinking. And when the Goths came, the empire didn't have the strength or the will to fight back. The sack of Rome in 410 CE was not the beginning of the end. It was the end of the illusion. An empire that could once field legions across the world now couldn't even defend its own capital. Not because it lacked soldiers, but because it lacked value. The empire had spent a century destroying the one thing that held it together: its money. Let's pause here, because this isn't just history, it's prophecy. Every major empire in history has followed this pattern. The same disease, the same symptoms, the same denial. The currency collapses long before the civilization does. The people feel it in their daily lives long before the historians notice. And by the time the rulers admit the truth, it's already too late. Rome's story is the perfect mirror for our time. We too live in an empire built on credit and illusion. We too are told that money can be created out of nothing, that debt is wealth, that inflation is transitory. We too are watching the gap widen between those who hold real assets and those who hold the bag. Just as Rome's emperors debased the denarius, our governments devalue our currencies through endless stimulus, deficit spending, and monetary manipulation. They tell you it's necessary. They tell you it's under control. They tell you it's for your benefit. It's not. It's for theirs. Here's the brutal truth. Rome didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it lied to itself for too long. It kept pretending that prosperity could be printed, that armies could be bought with bad money, that faith could survive without substance. But when the coins turned to dust, the people turned away. Because no empire, not even Rome, can survive the loss of trust. When you look at your paycheck, your savings account, or your government's balance sheet, remember Rome. Remember what happens when leaders trade long-term stability for short-term control. Remember what happens when money becomes fiction, because it always ends the same way. With bread and circuses for the masses, corruption for the elite, and ruin for everyone else. Rome's downfall wasn't a mystery, it was a formula. Step 1, debase the currency. Step 2, deny the problem. Step 3, punish those who see it. Step 4, collapse. It's the same formula you can trace through Weimar Germany, through Venezuela, through every hyperinflation in history. And it's the same formula unfolding quietly right now in the modern world. You see, money is more than numbers in a ledger or metal in a coin. It's trust. It's the social contract that holds civilization together. When Rome lost that, it didn't matter how many legions it had or how many laws it passed. Its power evaporated. That's what happens when a society spends more than it earns, borrows more than it can repay, and pretends that printing can replace production. It's not just economic collapse, it's moral collapse. The lesson of Rome is not about ancient coins. It's about human nature. When times are good, people forget that money is supposed to represent value. They start believing it is value, and that's when the corruption begins. Every empire tells itself that this time is different, that their system is smarter, more sophisticated, more modern, that they can outsmart the laws of economics. But no one ever has. By the time Rome's coins had turned to worthless metal, the empire had already died in spirit. The rest was just theatre. And today, as you watch your own currency lose purchasing power year after year, as you see the cost of everything rise while wages stagnate, you're watching the same play, just with different actors. The stage is modern. The script is ancient. So ask yourself, what is your denarius made of? Is your money real, or just another promise waiting to be broken? Because when the empire starts minting lies, the countdown begins. Rome's collapse wasn't a tragedy. It was a warning. And the question now is simple. Will we listen? Or will we repeat the cycle one more time